Hi everyone, welcome back to Chefy Things, where today we'll be making buttermilk biscuits. And for today's recipe, let's go over our equipment and then we'll talk about our ingredients. So we will be using our scale, measuring spoons, a sifter, a rubber spatula, and a pastry brush, our rolling pin, bench scrape and bowl scrape, and then a cookie cutter. Today I will be using a 3-inch cookie cutter. If you use smaller, you'll get more biscuits. If you use a larger cookie cutter, you'll get less biscuits. And we also need baking sheets lined with parchment paper and a mixing bowl. So we are going to begin by sifting together our dry ingredients. So this is 1 pound and 4 ounces of all-purpose flour. All right, get all of that out. Woo. Our leavening agent today that we're going to be using is baking powder. So this is 3 tablespoons. Dump all of that in there. I'm going in with 2 teaspoons of salt. Today I'm using a Himalayan pink salt. You could also use iodized salt. And last but not least, we're going to add 1 ounce of granulated sugar. Make sure we get all of that out. So most of my ingredients are measured out for me already. That way it makes the whole process easier whenever it comes to mixing. In the industry and in the kitchen, we like to call that mise en place. So we're making sure everything is put into place. So getting halfway through the recipe, we're not concerned whether or not we actually put the salt or the baking powder in. So no ingredients are left behind. So sifting that together, add some rather large bits of baking powder. So going through and sifting that, and of course it's not wanting to sift through, so you can always take and use your finger to kind of help push it along if necessary. All right, so give it a good tap. Make sure all of my ingredients come out of the bottom. I'm gonna take and move this off. Also, working in a cleaner workspace allows for everything just to continuously move along. It makes life a little bit easier on yourself. So as you can see, I have all of my dry ingredients. It's really nice, soft and fluffy. So we're gonna go ahead and start working with our next ingredient, which it's actually in the freezer. Let's go grab it. All right. So not only did we have our next ingredient, which is butter, but we had our box grater in there. Whenever you're making biscuits, you want to make sure your fat is nice and cold. For this recipe, I'll be using a box grater to grate my butter in, which I've also had in the freezer just to help. That way it allows the pieces of fat to be the right size, so I have to work with that fat the least amount. The least amount of hand contact and heat helps to create a nice flaky biscuit. So I am going to go ahead and begin grating this directly over my flour. And you can also take and lightly coat your butter in just a little bit of the flour to help make sure it's sticking. So I'm going to create a little bit of a well in the middle, slightly, for my box grater to go in, and I am going to be using the large side. There are various ways that you can actually cut your fat into your flour mixture. Some people take and dice them very small cubes. Others will actually take and use a piece of equipment called a pastry cutter. But for today, I wanted to show you guys a different technique. Biscuits weren't only traditionally made with butter. Some people actually use cold lard or shortening, as it helps to create a crispier texture. So today I'm using 8 ounces of butter. That would be 2 sticks. Of course, we want to use unsalted so we can control the amount of Salt going into our recipe. You want to work fairly quickly with this, as there's still going to be some friction and heat coming off. Also be careful not to injure yourself in this process. And those little bits you can just take and kind of clump them up. The goal is, after we get all of this done, it's going to resemble coarse cornmeal. Here comes my big hunk. Would you say I'm doing a great job? Come on! You gotta do better than that. Sorry, I like a good pun. If you've met me, you know this already. You also get a little bit of an arm workout as you're grating. All right, so give it some good love taps. Make sure you get all of that butter out. The butter is really nice and pretty and curled up. So now I'm gonna take and very gently just go in with nice clean hands, break up some of these pieces, break up that large chunk, and I'm just working it in. It is kind of a coarse texture. We don't want to continue to work our butter in much more, as the cold little pieces of butter are going to flatten out into thin little sheets, which are going to help create nice flaky layers within our biscuits. The next process for this recipe is we're going to take and add in some cold buttermilk to our mixture. I'm going to use my bowl scrape just to help so my hand doesn't get quite as messy. I'm going to add some of it in, gently mix it. Now it's going to kind of create a shaggy dough. Whenever I say that, it's not going to be fully incorporated. I'm going to go ahead and add some more. Also with this, you don't want to overwork your dough, as that will create a tough biscuit. And we want nice, flaky, tender biscuits. Also using the bowl scrape, less heat and contact with your hands. I do tend to have hot hands, so the bowl scrape is my friend. And for today, I actually made my buttermilk from scratch, as I didn't have any buttermilk in my refrigerator. And so with doing that, you can take and add a couple teaspoons of vinegar or any sort of acid, so you could use lemon juice, to your milk. So today I did 12 ounces. Mix that in and allow it to sit for about 10 to 15 minutes. All right, so shaggy dough has formed. So now I'm gonna take and dump it out onto my work surface. Scrape off what I can from my bowl scrape. And I'm gonna take and kind of begin to flatten it out. I am actually going to add my last little bit of milk, and I'm going to begin folding it in. So what's happening here is that we're creating some nice flaky layers. This would be a technique that we'll go into. I've heard some of y'all talking about laminated doughs like croissants and puff pastry. That is going to be on the list down the line. But with this, we're helping to create nice flaky layers. And you want to kind of knead your dough together without over mixing it, about 10 to 20 times. So as you can see, that butter's kind of starting to flatten out. Of course, it's sticking to your hands, but that's okay. Just make sure you get all of it off, so you can get as many biscuits out as possible. And as you can see, it's really starting to form together. And I do have a little sticking onto my counter, so I'm going in with my bench scrape. We'll take and add a little bit of extra flour onto our work surface to help with that process. One more time, and I am going to find my stopping point. Take and gather those little end pieces. Make sure I don't have sticking on the bottom. Okay, well, bam. I'm gonna stop right there. So as you can see, the butter has formed a nice flat surface. So that's really going to help with the flaky pull apart layers that you're going to get with this biscuit. So I'm going to scrape off as much dough as I can, grab my rolling pin and a little extra flour. Now that I have my biscuit dough formed together, I'm going to take and dust some flour onto my work surface so we can begin rolling out. So not only is it cool to do, it helps to really kind of space out the flour as even as possible. So now I'm going to go in with my rolling pin. I'm taking and dusting my rolling pin in some flour to make sure it is not sticking to the top of my dough. Whenever you're rolling, you want to start by putting your rolling pin in the middle, rolling half away from yourself and half towards yourself. Remember to keep even pressure throughout. I'm going to take and add some more, dust a little bit on top. And it's also a good practice to take and make sure you're kind of moving your dough around so you don't have any stickage on the bottom. Worst thing is getting your dough to the thickness that you need and you can't actually lift it up. And then that just begins a whole process of starting over, but we're not going to go into that because we got this. So rolling in that outwards motion. And with this, I'm looking for a 1/2 inch thick. Because of this recipe and because we're rolling it out to that thickness, it is actually going to at least double in size. With us using cold fat and cold butter, butter is made up of quite a bit of water. And with that, whenever water and this cold butter meets this hot oven, which I forgot to mention, my oven's been heating at 425. And that way it's a nice hot oven. These biscuits actually do bake pretty quickly at a hot temperature, which is important because that is whenever steam is going to be released, because that butter starts to melt, that water starts to evaporate, and it shoots up, which is going to create those nice flaky layers. And if you can come in and see, we have some nice shots of our butter going through. And so I measured my finger earlier, and so 1/2 inch is about halfway up my finger. So I'm going to give myself just a little bit more. Try and get all nice sides, so then that way you can take and cut as many biscuits as possible out in each roll, which is very important. I'm gonna go with this. I do like to take sometimes just to get those little fine parts, go in with my hand very gently to kind of help shape it. Now I'm gonna take and use my cookie cutter. Of course, use whatever size you would like. I've also quite a bit of times just made square biscuits. Making square biscuits allows for no excess trim. I'm dusting my cookie cutter with some flour so then that way our dough does not stick whenever we're cutting our cookies out. Biscuits! We're making biscuits. Also, something very important, don't take and squish and turn your cookie cutter around as you're cutting down, as it'll seal in the sides, and so you're not going to get those flaky layers in that tall biscuit that you're really wanting. So just take and press down to punch it out, and then lift up gently, and then reflour, and just continue this process over, getting as close as you can to the edge from the other one to get as many biscuits out of this first roll. You're asking yourself, why are you trying to get as close as possible? The more times that you roll this dough out, the tougher it is going to be. And that is because gluten is forming, which, if you've watched my yeast roll recipe, we talked about gluten and how it's necessary and helps with the overall shaping and texture of our bread, but we're making biscuits, nice, tender, soft biscuits. So to help with the tenderness, we don't want as much gluten to form. It's kind of like a game of Tetris. How close can you get? How many biscuits can you get out of one time? And there isn't any problem with taking and re-rolling out your biscuit. Ooh, look at those layers. You can actually see little bits of butter throughout. Yay! You can re-roll. The dough is going to be slightly tougher. Let's see. I'm game planning. So I made 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Whoop. All right. I'm gonna go grab the cookie sheet to place them on. Dust off some of my flour so I can set this down. This is where some preference comes into play. If you're wanting a softer and fluffier biscuit, we want to place our biscuits close together. If you're wanting a crispier crusted biscuit on the sides, you're going to give them some more space in between. So I'm going to place mine a little bit closer together. There is a chance that they're going to kind of touch. They're going to be friends. They're going to help one another rise. Being supportive. We love that. So these are my scraps left behind. So I'm going to take and slightly push them together. Kind of nestle those pieces in. I'm going to take and once again, we're playing a game. We're going to push it together. Take and fold on top. Kind of pinch and piece some together. Grab some more of my flour and roll it out a little bit more again. Okay. Yep. Alrighty. These aren't going to be quite as pretty as the first round of biscuits. I'm okay with that. I'm just going to take and push this together right here. I'm not going to do any more folding. These are just going to be some quality control biscuits right here. I'm just going to take and piece this last one together. All right. And with this will be my little Frankenstein one. I'll put these closer together and then give these guys some more space so we have a little bit of both, if possible. Before these biscuits go into the oven, I'm actually going to take and gently brush the tops of them with some milk. You could also do an egg wash. I'm going to use milk. And so with this, will actually help with the overall color of our biscuits. It'll help give it a nice golden brown finish, which we want. Anything golden tastes good. So at this point, before I were to put the milk on top, you could actually take and space these out on another cookie sheet or just give them more room and freeze them at this point. So whenever you would be wanting a biscuit, you could just pull one out the freezer and pop it into the oven. For now, I'm going to take and place these in a 425-degree oven for anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes. And I highly recommend rotating your pan about halfway through to make sure your oven is cooking nice and evenly. Let's get these thrown in. My timer just went off. Let's turn these biscuits. Ooh-wee. They're growing. All right. I'll set another timer for about 6 minutes and we'll check on them then. Oh yeah. Look at how nice. The time frame that it takes to bake a biscuit depends on the size. These biscuits ended up taking a little bit longer than I said. They went for probably about 18 minutes, and that's okay. What I'm looking for is a nice kind of golden brown surface, which I can see thanks to my milk. And then also it's got a nice golden bottom. Now I'm gonna take and allow them to rest for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and break into one and try it. Our biscuits have cooled down. Let's go ahead and plate them up, and then I'm ready to break into one of these. So you can see the difference between one of the first ones that we did. It's got some nice flaky layers. It's got a little more height. This is probably the second round that we had done on our rolling. It's not quite as tall. They're still going to be just as delicious. Take and plate these up. I need to get a bigger platter. And I am going to leave these right here just because they're not going to make it onto the platter because they're going to go into my stomach. I'm hungry. Let's go ahead and plate one of these up. I'm going to go for this one. So it's got a nice shiny finish with that milk. And I'm going to go ahead and pair this with some of my homemade muscadine jam. All right. So let's take, you don't even need a knife. You can take and break it open. Woo! Look at those flaky layers. Wow. So it almost looks like you could take and just peel it apart. So I'm gonna top this with some of my muscadine jelly. Let's go in for this bite. So it's got a really soft texture with just the slightest crunch. It's not overworked, so it's really soft. And you can still see little air pockets. That's where those little butter pieces were and where that steam created whenever it hit that hot oven. I don't know about you, but these were good. You could also pair these with a nice white gravy, maybe even a chocolate gravy. That's something I need to try. But either way, these biscuits are delicious. Sure to make somebody's Southern grandma very happy. Thanks so much for joining me today. This is Chefy Things. Have a great one.